Board and card game elements in RPGs, a good thing or the best thing? Today on Out of Character. Hi, and welcome to Out of Character. I'm Jason Corley.
I'm Scott Forster.
And I'm Aaron Lee Newbern.
And assisting us today on engineering is Don Dim.
Hey.
So today we want to talk about something that has had some controversy about it over the years. I can remember people fighting about it when I was in high school, which is the use of board and card game elements in RPGs. Mm-hmm. Now, there are those that say that, ever since the beginning, there have been miniatures and maps and things like that. There are those that say that those help your imagination. Other people say it impedes it because now you're focusing on it as kind of a board game. You're not inhabiting your character in the theater of the mind. Now, I have always thought that they always are 100% of the time help, at least in some ways, so long as they're tied to the mechanics of the game. Right. But I'd like to talk about some of the different, other than minis and maps, board and card game elements of RPGs and how they can be used to enhance the experience at the table. Scott, you're an experienced 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons game master, and I every time I go into the shops, I see they have decks of cards.
Yes.
And now, what are those, and how do they help, or do they?
I think they help a lot, for the most part.
What do they do, exactly?
They do, basically, if I gave my ranger the power to shoot somebody twice a turn. Okay. They call it Twin Strike.
Got it.
You just have a card on it that says, you attack twice, it has this to hit, it does this much damage. If I've got a more complicated power, like,
a spell or something like that.
Say I've got a fireball. Well, fireball is really basic. It just does damage. But say I've got something that, sleep spell that makes people start to fall asleep, and this is the modifier they have to their saving throw and everything. You can put all that information right on the card, so then you have everything in front of you rather than having to go through a book, or when you select...
Where's page 221?
Right, or what I always used to do with my spellcasters in older editions of D&D, I would, crib little notes on my character sheet, and I'd have these tiny little notes.
I always noticed that when people read those notes, they always tended to make mistakes in favor of their character.
Yes.
No one ever accidentally wrote down too little damage on those notes.
One thing I've really liked running 4th edition is if there's a confusion or a question, it's much like... being a magic judge, I just say, well, let me see the card. Give me the card. Let me look at it. I don't know if you have godlike powers. Oh, look, it says right here on the card that they get a saving throw. Or it says
versus
right here
your
on
godlike
the card.
powers.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So it's basically like an index.
Yeah.
That's what that's for. Okay.
It also gives you that tactile element of, how fresh is the wizard feeling? Does he have most of his spells? Well, most of his cards are turned upside down that he's used them.
Oh, I see.
So we might need to hit the bed real quick.
Speaking of tactile elements, the prior, not the current, but the prior Marvel Universe role-playing game was played entirely with a resource management system. Basically, you'd have your character sheet, and the various actions of your character would be divided up on the sheet. Like you'd have... like if you were Spider-Man, you might have super strength, you might have web slinging, and you might have spider senses. And then you would have a pool of energy stones that you would put towards your priorities. And there were various modifiers that would add stones or take away stones or things like that. And then you would compare the number of stones in your action to the target or to the stones that the villain would put in his action. And it was very confusing to read about this in a book. Like I was reading it going, I don't understand this game at all. I'm like, okay, well, let's just try it. And I put out a character sheet and I started moving the stones around. I learned it so much faster. Like this game I could teach to anyone in 5 minutes because of the tactile elements, and people learn when you give them things in different forms.
Oh, yeah.
So I think tactile elements are a good example of a way to enhance a role-playing game. Because of the way that you learn the system and experience the system then becomes different.
I've heard you can go a little too far. I haven't played Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the new edition.
I have heard this too.
I've heard it's quite fiddly. I intend to give it a try this fall.
I'd love to give it a go.
One of the great things about it is they made a box set that actually has all the cards you need to make all the characters that come in the base set right in there. So when it comes time to develop your character, you just pull out the deck of cards and you're like, well, do I want to hit somebody really hard? Do I want to use my shield? Do I want to,
So like you have
somebody fast.
equipment, you have like a style of play, and then maybe like a race or class type of card.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
There are special ones like, if you are the dwarf troll slayer, here's where you go insane and kill things really hard.
Nice.
Please count for me the ways you use poker chips in Tucson too.
Okay, so poker chips I use for action points, for systems that have action points. I use them for plot points in Fate, which is a little bit different. When you pay someone in order to do something that's against their best interest, that's according to their character. A lot of times games have, like, I can fudge villains' rolls to be a little bit higher if I pay for it by paying the poker chip to a character. I got actual nice heavy poker chips primarily because I like Deadlands. And Deadlands had a lot of different poker chip mechanics. Bennies, yep, in the Savage Worlds version. And they've just been useful in so many ways because people can just quickly look at them. Fan mail in Primetime Adventures, absolutely. Gosh, there's probably a million more. But poker chips are nice because if you get the nice ones, they're heavy. Like you can hold them in your hand and feel how good you're doing.
Right.
And you can look at a stack in front of someone, like you said with the Wizard's cards, Aaron, and you can tell immediately, oh, they need a little bit of attention, or maybe they're doing okay.
From a DM's perspective, I find that really handy to be able to see at a glance, okay, they've got a bunch of things turned down, they've run out of action points, it might be time to back this encounter off a little bit so that we don't have everyone dying, because that's less fun.
The earliest card game resolution mechanic that I ever saw, and this is just me personally, I'm sure there was some before that someone will bring up, but was in Castle Falkenstein. Now, I know all three of you are like Castle Falkenstein geniuses, right? You know all about Castle Falkenstein? You can explain it to the audience? Okay, so Castle Falkenstein was Mike Pondsmith's brilliant early, I would even say pre-steampunk RPG. It was set in a magical steam fantasy 19th century. And the rule book was written as if he were a game designer that had been pulled into this magical world and then had to explore it and learn about it on its own. And of course, he gets into all kinds of sticky situations and adventures and so on. But he then designs a game, because he's a game designer, he designs a game based on his adventures and teaches this game to the inhabitants of the world. And this is the book that you're now reading. Nice. Now, of course, it's a Victorian world, and gentlemen and ladies would never be caught rolling dice. That is for laborers and other persons. So instead, the card game mechanic is based on whist, a card game that was very popular among the European gentry at the time. And so you're trying to play cards that will assist you in different situations. And so what I found when I was playing this game is having a hand of cards, and like spades assisted you in fighting and hearts assisted you in social stuff and things like that. When you had a hand of cards, you felt more in control than if you were rolling a die. When you're rolling a die, you're letting your fate go to the winds. But with cards, I feel like I have more control over how I'm going to do.
Right. I really want this to succeed, so I'm going to back it with a high card.
With a big card, right?
Or, well, I guess it doesn't really matter, so I'll just throw a little bit.
I'll try to burn this bad card on something that I don't really care about.
Yeah, these are all great things. I like them, but I'm a little ambivalent on the board card. I know I'm the one person.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
And and this is from someone who's been playing 4th Ed D&D and loving it for the past 3.5 years. Don't get me wrong.
Okay,
but the issue I have with the board and card game elements is occasionally the sort of game Scott plays, which is very D&D, very action oriented. Great, so much better than digging.
Hit it with my axe.
Better than digging for page 236 to understand the description of the Steel Time spell.
Right.
But the sort of game I play, which is heavily narrative, rules light, stuff like John Wick stuff, where it's all about the story, the characters. Board and card game elements paint the fourth wall too much. They break.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
By creating this very mechanical, tactile view of it, going, okay, well, I do this, I do that. I use these rules to move here and do the very crunchy, rulesy stuff that is inherent to using a lot of the board and card game elements. Sort of takes you out of the diegesis of the world, in that I don't spin poker chips when I really need to do well at my job. I don't have that option, at least not in any conscious sense. So it sort of breaks that character immersion.
So in other words, and here I'm thinking of like a really good action movie is going to have a character who's taking action based on their internal drives and needs and so on. And if you're making it more on a tactical decision making on a grid, that takes away from, say, a chaotic feeling, or it takes away from a dangerous feeling, things like that.
There is one exception, though, and it's a game I have been dying to play ever since I heard of it. Dread. Oh, of course. Dread is
We've talked about it many times on the show.
It came out in 2006 from The Impossible Dream, I believe is the publishing company. Dread is a horror game that uses Jenga as its resolution mechanic. And talk about a visceral feeling.
Right. So Jenga, you have the tower of sticks, and you're pulling a stick out whenever you take a dangerous action.
Whenever something actually threatens you. And it has that tension of, like in a horror movie, when someone is carefully opening that door and everyone is just looking at that block like, oh my... No. Because the mechanic is, if you take something beyond your means or something dangerous, and you can pull that block out and set it on top, everything's fine. As soon as that tower drops, your character dies, or goes insane, or is imprisoned or possessed, or some other means of your character is no more. So it creates that real high tension. Although it does have this great mechanic, which lets you mirror horror movies where someone takes like the great sacrifice, where if you want to, you can reach over and push over the tower, and you automatically succeed at the cost of your life.
Nice.
Creates that very visceral, but that just sensation of that anticipation. And the design of Jenga actually mirrors the arc of a horror movie scene, of a beat where you have that rationing tension. You start out, everything's fine. Everyone can make a couple turns of Jenga.
Anybody can do that,
I have a dex of 3, and I can make 3 turns of Jenga. But as the stakes get higher and higher, that tower gets tougher.
You get deeper into the haunted house.
You never have that anticlimax where you run up to the boss and everyone rolls a crit in a row, and
the boss is gone.
And the boss is gone. or where some random goblin mook keeps watching you roll ones. It has a very natural narrative arc in this game, and that's what I love about it.
And that reminds me of another game with a narrative arc. We'll talk about it briefly. It's called With Great Power. It's a superhero game, and it's played with cards, and there are many different maneuvers, basically, that superheroes can do. They can fight, they can use a power, they can maneuver, they can speechify. They have like a list of different things, and you are dealt a hand of cards, and you have to play a particular suit, and you have to play higher than what your opponent does. And if you want to change from, say, fighting to speechifying, you have to play a card of that different suit that is of the same rank as the card that your opponent just played. At the beginning of the game, the villains' hands are much larger. They have many more wild cards and are much more effective in every way. As the heroes are beaten in several scenes, their hands get bigger. They get the wild cards. The villains lose the ability to use their wild cards. So by the end of what they call I think it's even called the story arc. By the end of the story arc, when the villains are really fighting hard to get their super plan, off the ground and fire their giant moon laser, whatever it happens to be, then that's when the heroes are primed mechanically in order to come back on it. So you really like to have board and card game elements that are connected to the narrative of the game.
Things that...
More than the tactics. Even.
I don't want to have that Alice moment where I go, wait a minute. You're all just a pack of cards.
Right. Nice. Nice. All right. Well, if you have any thoughts on board or card game elements, be sure to send them to us, and be sure to tune in on our first ever live episode. This is going to be at livestream.com/pulpgamer. It's going to be on August 21st, 7 p.m. Pacific, and we're going to have John Wick here. We're going to be talking about some issues that are raised by his games. We're all big fans of his here, and we've brought up many of his games over the last few episodes, so there's lots to say. This will be the conclusion of our season 2. We're going to be looking at making some changes and coming back again, so this is the perfect time to get us your feedback. If you want to give us feedback on the show, or what you like or don't like about it, send us an email to pulpgamer@pulpgamer.com, and we definitely read everything that we get, even if we don't reply. And definitely check out that live stream. It'll be something we've never done before, something we've never tried. I'm sure it'll go perfectly and there won't be any hitches whatsoever. No and you can participate in it as well. And you can communicate with anybody on the show on Twitter, on Facebook. You can also reach us in the comments on the YouTube videos, as well as on pulpgamer.com. And I hope to see everybody there on the live stream. I think it should be a blast. Fun. Yeah. Well, thanks for watching, everyone.
TheCultGamer.com.